Hello and welcome to yet another opportunity that I've had from the U.S. Embassy here in Lusaka. The last time I was here, I was speaking to outgoing Charge d'Affaires David Young, but I'm back, but this time to get an understanding of what it is like working on this mission by the Deputy Chief of Mission, John Armiger, here in Lusaka. And it's for a very simple reason, and that's because Zambia and the U.S. government continue cooperating on a number of fronts in health, in economics, and security, to mention but a few. My interest is to find out where the two countries are headed with these very matters of health, education, national security, and of course social issues which the two governments share. Let me welcome my guest. He's a Deputy Chief of Mission, John Armiger, and hopefully at the end of the day we'll have had a good sense of where these two governments' relations are going. Thank you for being with us, and welcome to this interview.
Thank you. It's a pleasure to be with you.
Right. It's always my habit, perhaps, to get to know who my guest is in a full sense, and you are Deputy Chief of Mission. We'll get into the details about that kind of work in a few moments. But I guess for the viewer, it's really to know who John Armiger is.
Sure. Well, sir, thank you again for having me on your program. I have been coming to Africa for over 20 years. I actually first came to Zambia in 1998. I was visiting my cousin in neighboring Zimbabwe, and we traveled through Victoria Falls and Livingston, and I was hooked. And a few years later, I returned to West Africa as a Peace Corps volunteer, and I've been coming back in a personal or professional capacity ever since. And today, I'm very honored to be here with you as an American diplomat here in Zambia. I've served in our Foreign Service for about 12 years. Before arriving in Zambia about 8 months ago, I served in Nairobi, Kenya, and before that in New Delhi, India, and then in Washington for 2 assignments, and then in Port-au-Prince, Haiti before that.
There's so many areas hopefully we'll touch on today, but what for you stands out as matters that Zambians watching this, should pay attention to?
Sure. So let me step back a little bit, and I want to explain to your viewers a little bit about how I think about Africa and Zambia. First and foremost, the future is African demographically. In the next 30 years, the continent's population is going to double in size. It's going to move from 1.2 billion people to 2.4 billion people, with a median age under 20 years old. And so that will mean that a quarter of the world's population will be African. And the second way I think about Africa is global. You have an Ethiopian who is running the World Health Organization, a Nigerian is leading the World Trade Organization, a Zambian has forever changed the field of economics, and everyone across the world enjoys the music of people like Sampa the Great or Esther Chungu, who recently played with Coldplay in New York City. And so Africa is a priority for the United States, and it's a priority for the Biden administration. And Secretary Blinken has been very clear about this in a speech he recently gave in Abuja, Nigeria, that on the most urgent challenges and opportunities that we face as a world, that Africa will make the difference, and that it's time to stop treating Africa as a subject of geopolitics and start treating it as the geopolitical player it is. So I'm here to report today that the U.S.-Zambia partnership is better than it's ever been before. And that's for a very simple but powerful reason. We are working towards a common agenda to make our people freer, safer, healthier, and more prosperous. And those 4 key issues really frame the U.S. government's priorities in Africa and specifically in Zambia. And they match the New Dawn administration's priorities. So let me tell you a little bit more about those. So first and foremost, we are strengthening democratic institutions, and we're very proud that Zambia will help shape the agenda of the next Summit for Democracy. Number two, we are promoting inclusive economic growth, and we're very excited about a second Millennium Challenge Corporation that's on the horizon. Third, we are promoting health and human development. And just last month, we renewed our commitment through PEPFAR, the President's Emergency Plan for AIDS Relief, to have an AIDS-free generation in Zambia. And then lastly, we're advancing regional peace and stability. And we've just recently, or on the verge of opening a new Office of Security Cooperation. And so, but the most important thing, which really underpins all of those areas of cooperation, is our people-to-people ties. And these date back to before Zambia's independence, when a young Kenneth Kaunda visited the United States and compared notes on peaceful forms of protest with Martin Luther King Jr. And they extend all the way up until today, where you have an American vice president who spent time in Zambia as a child, invite President Hichilema, who is an alumnus of a U.S. exchange program, to visit the White House last year. And he became the first Zambian leader since 1992 to visit the White House. So there's a lot of exciting things happening in the U.S.-Zambia partnership, and I'm delighted to speak with you today about those.
Right, that's well elaborated. There are certain feelings sometimes that a continent like Africa, and it's interesting, the narrative is changing, but for a long time, it's been either it's a dumping ground for West from the West, or a place where it's just a source for raw materials to develop. And Africans are demanding a change in that narrative to be equal partners. So countries like the US should be pushing for more industrialization, more utilization of raw materials for purposes of having those industries on the continent. How do you see that working, and how soon do you think that will actualize?
So first, let me respond. I absolutely agree with that statement, that the image of Africa is changing, rightly so, and that it is moving more towards an image of the opportunity and potential and as equal partners and true equal partners to tackle global challenges. But what you talk about in terms of sort of the economic potential of Africa and changing the narrative, first I want to say in terms of Zambia, the United States sees Zambia as possessing tremendous economic potential. But that's in agriculture, that's in energy, that's in tourism, in addition to mining, of course. And in terms of, and that's what in a Millennium Challenge Corporation Compact is here to do. The goal of the MCC is to unlock that potential for Zambians, for the benefit of Zambians. And so last December, the board of the MCC approved Zambia's eligibility for a second compact. And I want to be clear about what a compact is. It's important to think about the compact as a joint venture, as a partnership. The Zambian government will invest in this compact, and the Zambian government will shape this compact, and the Zambian government will be a full co-equal partner in that compact. We had a technical mission in Zambia a few weeks ago for 2 weeks, and they met with a variety of stakeholders from government to civil society to talk about and really look at what are the binding constraints to economic growth in Zambia. And so there are a few things, and the process is underway, but I'm pleased to report that the CEO, Alice Albright of MCC, will soon be visiting Zambia to have conversation with President Hichilema to talk about the development of that compact. And I know she will be addressing the media during her visit, so I'll defer future comments to her press engagement. But I want to be clear about one thing in particular, and Finance Minister Musa Katwani is exactly right when he says the strongest engine for economic growth is unleashing the power of the private sector, of the markets, and of the entrepreneurs. And the bottom line is this, is that doing business in Zambia should be as easy as cooking in Shima, but it's not. And Finance Minister Musa Kotwani, in a recent interview in Washington a couple weeks ago, acknowledged the fact that Zambia has to do its part to create a welcoming environment for investors. And investors, as we all know, are capital, I should say, and to quote the late and great American statesman Colin Powell, capital is a coward. And investors only go where they feel most welcome, where they feel like their investments will grow and be protected. And so the reforms that the New Dawn administration is undertaking will help bring U.S. companies, U.S. investors into Zambia and across, hopefully, all of Southern Africa. And so when more U.S. companies and more U.S. investors come, they bring a couple things with them. They bring transparency, they bring rule of law, they bring an openness, they bring superior quality, they bring cutting-edge technology, they bring employment, and they bring skills transfer to Zambians. So when you see a U.S. project on the side of the road, you will see Zambian workers from top to the bottom.
Right.
We do not import labor. And U.S. companies have to follow Zambian laws,
right,
or else they will be prosecuted under U.S. laws.
Right. The inverse ought to be true as well, where Zambian entrepreneurs, call them small and medium enterprises, also break into the American market. The initiative that should have prompted this, and we should have drawn by now, was through the Africa Growth Opportunity Act, or AGOA. And it doesn't seem to have had major uptakes. It would suggest that something hasn't worked. How much effort should be put in that regard?
Yeah, I'm glad you raised the African Growth and Opportunity Act, also known as AGOA. Let me first state that two-way trade between the United States and Zambia is about $100 million US annually. And U.S. foreign direct investment in Zambia is about $50 million annually. That's not good enough, and we can do a lot better. And so the reality is that most African nations do not take full advantage of AGOA. They just don't. But we are working through the U.S. Agency for International Development, through its Trade Hub project, to change that here in Zambia. And let me give you two success stories of Zambian companies. So there is a Luano Honey company just last month shipped over 20 tons of honey to the American market. Another company called 260 Brands, which produces corn and soy products, now lists itself on Amazon.com. So those are two really good examples of Zambian companies breaking into the American market, and we hope it is just the tip of the iceberg. But I will say it is one thing to just sit here and talk about trade statistics, and it's another to see for yourself. So I want to personally invite you to visit the USAID's Trade Hub project and see for yourself how that project is putting more kwacha and dollars into people's pockets.
Added to that is the quest to unlock opportunities in the private sector. It is common knowledge that Zambia is, deep into managing its debt, and so resources are locked up, and the government is trying through the IMF, obviously, in trying to clinch a deal. What are you doing to aid the government in that regard, considering that the U.S. voice is important in this process, and that the sooner this works, the better?
Absolutely. So the United States has been very clear at the outset that the United States supports Zambia's ability to restructure its debt through the G20 Common Framework. We believe that all countries deserve and have a right to restructure their debt and seek debt treatment so that they don't maintain trapped in a debt trap. And because that is a path to poverty, not a path to prosperity. So we have made our position very clear, not only publicly at the IMF spring meetings just a couple weeks ago, but I believe we've made that privately in all of the G20 Common Framework discussions. So we are 100% committed to Zambia's ability to restructure its debt through the G20 Common Framework.
What for you would be the best path? What sort of aid or advice would you give in that sense?
Well, I think Zambia and Finance Minister Musa Katwani and President Hichilema are on the right path. They are pursuing at every level, in my understanding, to make sure that all of Zambia's owners of credit or of debt come to the table. And I know that they are working tirelessly, and I know it's a priority. And in fact, when Finance Minister Musa Katwani was at the IMF spring meetings, he said this is first and foremost the #1 priority for the New Dawn administration. So I think what they're doing, it's not just an economic situation. It's not just about debt, but there are a lot of politics wrapped up in this as well. And I know that they are, they're enlisting the full force of the New Dawn administration. There are visits underway through the foreign minister, talking to all of the debt holders as well. And we are cautiously optimistic that it will work out. But, everyone has to come to the table. We're certainly there. I know a lot of other of our partners and Zambia's partners are there.
So while all this happens, they want us to think that what's supposed to be the gains get to be reversed because now there's the Russia-Ukraine war, and the schools of thought that part of the problem could be, quote unquote, the U.S.'s involvement through supporting Ukraine. Does that negate all the gains that are supposed to be obtained by a country like Zambia? And what is your take about this impression that perhaps the U.S. is funding this war from the sidelines?
Well, I certainly reject that, and I will say that Russia's unjustified, unprovoked, and brutal invasion of Ukraine is causing a humanitarian crisis. And it's really hard not to be moved by the images broadcast out of Ukraine and by the bravery of the Ukrainians defending themselves. President Putin's war of choice is an attack on the UN Charter, to which Zambia is a signatory. And it really does call into question the security, the sovereignty, and the territorial integrity of all nations, including Zambia. But I want to be clear about one thing. As a diplomat, I think about those issues of war and peace and geopolitics on a daily basis, but I recognize that most people do not. But it does impact us all. And I want to give an example of how, bring it kind of closer to home. And that's with the result of this war is the prices of fuel and fertilizer are skyrocketing. And so what does that mean? That means it is harder for Zambian farmers to plant their crops. That means there's going to be less food on the table for people's families. That means there's going to be less money in people's pockets to pay children's school fees. And that is a path to permanent poverty, all because of a Russian autocrat's war of choice. That's the fundamental reality of what we're facing here.
How then does a Zambian or an African appreciate these efforts that your government, is making, if at the same time you have skyrocketing prices, you have initiatives that have to be made to counter the negatives that come with this particular situation?
Well, I would say, first and foremost, what I would say is it's important for all nations to stand up and speak out and object to the war, the invasion of Ukraine. And we're very happy that Zambia has condemned the war at the United Nations. It's also more about how democracies need to come together. The reality is we need to be clear-eyed about the challenges we face in the 21st century. Democracies are in a contest with autocracies about the best way, about the best system to deliver for its people. President Biden and President Hichilema share the view that democracy is the best tool we have to unleash the full potential, our full human potential. And so democracies must stand together, we must learn from one another, and we must support one another. And that's really the driving force and the reasoning and the purpose behind President Biden convening these summits for democracy with world leaders, with legislators, with members of civil society. And again, as I mentioned at the top, we're very proud that President Hichilema will play a significant role in the upcoming Summit for Democracy. He will help shape that agenda as a partner in that Summit for Democracy.
Mm. Let's move away from that a bit and maybe touch on another area that has obvious concern, and I'm talking about health, because for a while now, the U.S. government has been spending quite colossal sums to try and manage the disease burden, and in particular HIV and AIDS, and now there's COVID-19. There's an outbreak of polio and related matters. Is there an end to this? Is this like a bottomless pit? I mean, for how long do you keep up this kind of support?
Well, I will say that the Americans are incredibly generous. But let me take a step back and just talk a little bit about the health programs we have here. The United States government invests in the most important asset in Zambia, and that's its people. So as you mentioned, the United States is the largest contributor and strongest partner in the public health sector, impacting over 15 million Zambians. And this partnership dates back over 2 decades. And in that time, over 20 years, we have made incredible accomplishments and gains. And one of the most powerful is that the life expectancy of Zambians has gone from 44 years old to 64 years old. That's a savings of 20 years of life for Zambians. That is an incredible thing of which we are very, very proud. You mentioned HIV and AIDS. Just last month, our PEPFAR program, which is really our flagship public health program, renewed its commitment to an AIDS-free generation and invested another over 7 billion kwacha. And that will bring the total since 2004 to over 100 trillion kwacha invested on making sure there's an AIDS-free generation in Zambia. But it's really not about the numbers, it's about the partnership. And what this partnership has created is effectively a public health service delivery system. And this platform became critical infrastructure during the global pandemic. And so let me tell you a little bit about what we're doing to combat COVID-19. So we have invested over 1 billion kwacha. We have delivered over 4 million vaccines. In fact, just last Friday, we delivered over 300,000 Pfizer vaccines. This is all free. This is no strings attached. But the United States government recognizes that the biggest killer in Zambia is the mosquito. And so that's why in 2007, the US president launched the President's Malaria Initiative. And we have invested over 6 billion kwacha in partnership with the Ministry of Health and the Centers for Disease Control to combat malaria. You mentioned polio as well. That partnership is eradicating polio as well. And so again, Centers for Disease Control, in partnership with the Ministry of Health, in just last week, in I think the second phase of this plan to eradicate the outbreak of polio, vaccinated over 4 million children in just 4 days. So these are incredible statistics in terms that reflect the strength of our partnership. And again, we work here arm in arm, hand in hand with our Zambian counterparts on this.
Does much of that pool of resource go into medicines rather than human human resource? Where should it be
Yeah.
channeled, you think?
Yeah, no, and it's a very good question. It goes into sort of everything. I mean, it's a full court press to attack these global these health security issues. But more and more, you mentioned, is this a bottomless pit? More and more, the focus is and has to be on building the capacity and strengthening the local systems here in Zambia so that we work ourselves out of a job. The ultimate goal is for us to no longer be here in that capacity, is that our partnership then leads to the Zambian health system standing up on its own to be able to respond to, prevent, tackle all of these outbreaks.
What can you see in that sense?
Well, I mean, I am not a public health specialist. I'm not a medical doctor, but I know from a policy level, these are conversations that are happening at the highest levels of our government, that the focus has to be on capacity building. Because like you said, or like I said, Americans are incredibly generous, but it is not a bottomless pit, and it will not last forever. This impacts our politics as well in the United States at home. America is a very rich nation, but not all Americans are rich. And so there are a lot of Americans who struggle with healthcare issues at home in the United States as well. So I'm not here to say that there are any changes in the funding or any changes in support, because that's not at all what I'm saying. But it is important to acknowledge that the focus should be in building capacity.
What, in your opinion, is the effect of the health burden on the continent and maybe in Zambia in general?
I mean, I think you cannot achieve any of the goals, whether it's economic prosperity or advancing security or promoting democracy, if your population is sick and dying and doesn't have access to health care. So in many ways for people, it's the first building block in development. You have to have people who are healthy, who are vibrant, who can go to work, who can go to school, and are not plagued by treatable diseases in the 21st century. So I think it's fundamental.
Right. Being here and going across, certain things have an impression on you, whether it's in health, social welfare. What stands out for you right now?
Well, I recently just returned from a trip to Lower Zambezi, so the beauty of your country truly stands out. And when I talked earlier about the potential for tourism and having come here over 20 years ago, tourism is really, my professional goal while I'm here is not only to get more Americans thinking about Africa the way I do and the way the Biden administration does, but it's to get more American friends and family to visit me here in Zambia and see for themselves how amazing it is here, and how wonderful it is to live here. You mentioned earlier about some dynamics, basically bad press, that Africa gets some bad press and that it scares away investors, or people think very differently. A lot of it is because they just don't know it. They've never been here themselves. And one of the great opportunities of being a diplomat overseas is that we bring our families to come visit us. And I know personally that many of my colleagues have brought family members who've never stepped foot outside the Western Hemisphere, and they've come to Zambia, and it was the best trip of their entire lives. So for me, that's what really stands out. It's the potential in the tourism sector, and to really sort of do our part to get people to better appreciate and understand how great it is here.
When one considers the great relations that exist between Zambia and the U.S., and the fact that for over 2 years they've not had an American ambassador to Zambia, they start wondering what is currently going on.
What is going on? Yeah. Well, it's been too long.
Right.
I mean, there's no question about that. The United States Embassy welcomes the announcement that President Biden has nominated Michael Gonzalez to be the next U.S. ambassador to Zambia. As you know, our Constitution is very clear about the process on presidential appointments. The Senate plays a role to advise and consent on that. So the process is now with the Senate for further consideration, and I'll let that process play out before I comment any further.
You're part of, or you read the process of electing Zambia's 7th president. You mentioned him a few times in this chat. What's been your impression about Zambia's ability and the way it's managed itself in that context?
In the context
of elections.
Of elections.
Right.
Well, I mean, I would say that Zambia's commitment to democratic principles is really an inspiration, not just in the region or the continent, but in the world. When President Hichilema was elected, and then there was a peaceful transfer of power, that was the third peaceful transfer of power in Zambia's history. That's unfortunately a fairly rare thing on the continent, and it's something that should be really appreciated by a lot of nations. And Zambia has really burnished its democratic credentials through that process, and is a model for the region and for the world. And I think during the era of COVID, when we saw a lot of autocrats kind of squeeze their grip on their populations, Zambia was really a shining success story of democracy in the era of COVID. So it's something I am very proud to have been here to witness and to see. And there's something incredibly inspiring about knowing and seeing that people are standing in line all day to exercise their constitutional right to choose their elected leaders.
Part of the conversation, which I'm sure you've come across, is the talk around security. And you mentioned it at the beginning. What is the U.S. government's stance or objectives when it comes to regional security? Because it is important to talk about. What are some of the misunderstandings you think should be cleared with regards to the U.S. government's interest with regional security?
Sure. Well, let me just say at the outset, the United States and Zambia are strengthening our security cooperation. But I want to be very clear about one thing. An Office of Security Cooperation is not a military base. It is an office inside this embassy, literally just down the hall from my own office. It's where an individual will be in the office, sit behind a desk, type at a computer, and do the needful, largely paperwork, about expanding that security cooperation. And expanding the security cooperation, as President Hichilema and the Ministry of Defense have rightly stated recently, is not necessarily about boots on the ground or military bases. It's about things like supporting UN peacekeeping in the region. And the Zambian battalion, one of the most highly regarded contributors to the peacekeeping system, recently launched training for its 8th iteration to keep peace in the Central African Republic. And the United States government has supported those battalions in deployment. And with the Office of Security Cooperation, we can support even more. It's also about keeping the armed forces healthy. And so we talked a little bit about PEPFAR. The U.S. Department of Defense is a core member of the PEPFAR interagency team, along with the State Department, the U.S. Agency for International Development, Centers for Disease Control, and Peace Corps. And so what the Defense Department is doing is cooperating with the Zambian armed forces to prevent, treat, and care for HIV. It's all part of that overall goal of having an AIDS-free generation in Zambia. And so we look at keeping the military strong. And then lastly, what I would like to say is you can think of security and stability almost like a commodity. And it's something that Zambia can export to the region. And that's literally what it's doing. It's a net security provider. It is exporting stability to the region. And then we share a goal with the Zambian government in doing that. We find that when there is more stability, more security, that creates a path to more democracy, more prosperity. And so it's a key feature of what we're trying to accomplish in the region and around the world. Because as President Hichilema has said, is that you can't achieve any of these other goals if you don't have security in place. And then let me just make one more point to commend the Zambian Armed Forces. The Zambian Armed Forces do a tremendous job of integrating women into the armed forces. I mean, in many ways, they are really ahead of their time, incredibly progressive. Over 25% of the Zambian armed forces are women. And unfortunately, that's a very rare thing. So it's something that all Zambians should be very proud of with the Zambian armed forces.
Right. If I could take you back to issues of the economy just as we wrap up, you mentioned intending American companies that might want to invest in this country. And obviously, the major issue or part of what is big in this country is the need to create jobs, real jobs, like they say. And I think you hinted that that would be the priority of these American jobs or investors should they come to Zambia. Would you like to elaborate? What areas do Zambians stand to benefit from these investments?
Sure. Well, again, I'll recall Finance Minister Musa Katwani in an interview recently when he talked about one of the critical needs here in Zambia is to expand agriculture and the ability for agriculture to create more jobs. And that requires infrastructure. It requires transportation to get those products to market. So there's a lot of potential in agriculture and infrastructure and building roads. And he talked about the opportunity to build more roads from the Democratic Republic of Congo going through Zambia and out to the ports of Namibia. We are looking to have more U.S. companies participate in those opportunities. So the more public tenders there are, the more transparent the process is, the more truly competitive the process is, the more U.S. companies will come invest in Zambia. Like I said before, sort of capital is a coward. So a lot of this is looking for the signal. They're looking for the market signal. So there are a couple things that they're looking at. Obviously, they're looking at an IMF program. That's going to give investors a lot of comfort in terms of Zambia is on the right track out, right path to prosperity. The other thing they're looking at is some of the infrastructure projects that are currently up for tender right now. They're looking at how transparent those are. And they're looking to see who sort of wins those tenders to build a road like from Lusaka to Ndola, the dual carriageway. And so they'll look to see what the outcome of a project like that is, and that will determine in many ways for these U.S. companies, is Zambia open for business or is it business as usual? And so that's really the reality of where we are right now. We can do everything we can to champion U.S. companies coming into Zambia and investing, but at the end of the day, the U.S. government can't tell companies what to do. They go where the markets are, and again, they go where they feel most welcome. So it's really incumbent upon the Zambian government to make them feel most welcome, and we partner with the Zambian government to do that through lots of different agencies. The U.S. Commerce Department, U.S. Agency for International Development, the new Development Finance Corporation. So we're there at a technical level to support a lot of these reforms that need to be done. But at the end of the day, the companies will look at the market and look at the signals and go where they feel most welcome.
It would be a disservice to end this without touching on exchange programs, whether it's at a professional level or whether it's at an academic level, that have continued, U.S., Zambia. What's your impression? How far is this going? What has it done, you think?
I think it's done amazing things, and it's one of the best diplomatic tools that we have in our toolkit. Today, over 2,000 Zambians have participated in a U.S. exchange program, and we have a variety of them, from the Young African Leaders Initiative to the International Visitors Leadership Program, which President Hichilema was an alumnus, which I believe you are also an alumnus of that program. We have the Mandela Washington Fellows. Just earlier today, our Chargé d'Affaires, Martin Dale, was at our Public Affairs Officer's house to meet the new Mandela Washington Fellows. So I think in many ways, I want that budget to be even bigger. I want to have more Zambians have the opportunity to study in the United States, and I want more Americans to study in Zambia and visit Zambia. Because at the end of the day, like I said in my opening remarks, the people-to-people ties underpin the strength of this relationship, and that's the real driving force. And you make these connections with individuals, it opens people's eyes, it allows them to better understand our cultures, our way of doing things. We learn a lot from each other, and I hope that we can expand these programs even more.
Do you wake up every day being this enthusiastic about all these things?
I do. I am fundamentally enthusiastic. I love my job. I think it's the best job in the world. I get to serve my country and live overseas and meet new people and promote American interests with our partners everywhere. I get to live in places like Lusaka and Nairobi and New Delhi. My family loves it here. It's an amazing lifestyle. Our kids are running around having a great time going to school here in Zambia. I mean, we're getting to see new places. My friends and family are quite envious, and I feel quite privileged to represent my country as a diplomat.
Well, we hope we can keep you more here in Zambia. Thank you for talking to us.
Thank you very much for having me.
Right. And I'm afraid that's it. The chats that I've been having with the Deputy Chief of Mission, John Armiger, here from the U.S. Embassy. And what I wait to happen is to come and get more sentiments about experiences that he looks forward to. Thank you for being with us. Goodbye.